Welcome to episode 7 of Lost in Transmission, a deep dive into modern textual criticism. This episode will be taking a look at modern eclectic editions of the Greek Bible, in other words, the critical Greek New Testament. Now, this textbook that we're working from, Textual Criticism of the Bible, or Student's Guide to Textual Criticism of the Bible, its history, methods, and results by Paul D. Wagner, published in 2006, and it covers all of the techniques from the early church fathers through the 20th century, but does not seem to be aware of the 21st century developments, in particular the coherence-based genealogical method. And that's going to become relevant here in the very first paragraph I'm going to read. Presently, there are two common forms of the Greek text: the Greek New Testament 4th edition, Stuttgart United Bible Society, and the Novum Testamentum Graece 27th edition. So we'll stop right there. The UBS 5 is currently out, version 5, and the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece is the 28th edition is published. In fact, maybe the 29th is even out. I don't know yet. But they're working on the 29th, and they're working on the 6th edition of the UBS. However, there is an edition that isn't spoken of here. And see, the coherence-based genealogical method produces those scholars are located in Münster Institute in Germany, and they create the Editio Critica Major. And so that is the result of the coherence-based genealogical method. And so once they complete those renderings, then these critical versions consume them almost verbatim. And so there's this new source. It's the coherence-based genealogical method is now resolving the variants, and that these two critical Greek New Testaments directly consume the ECM, and then the publishers like Nelson Publishing or Crossway for the ESV and so on, they will consume these critical Greek New Testaments and translate them into their versions in the vulgar languages such as English. Now, the exception to that would be the King James, which is static because it has used the received text for over 400 years, 410 years now. So now might be a good time to just give a brief listing of the Greek New Texts that people consult today. So there's these two critical Greek New Testaments by the United Bible Society and the Nestle Aland. Then there's the majority text, which is a Greek New Testament that uses the Byzantine text as a priority. It's a Byzantine text form. Then we still have the received text, and you can get a version of that from like the Trinitarian Bible Society, for example. They still publish that. And there are some lesser known Greek versions, but those are the main ones. But for a modern Bible, for example, what I mean by a modern Bible. A modern Bible, I will say, and I might be creating in my own category here, is a version, a translation that consumes the critical Greek New Testament. So, for example, what would not be a modern Bible? Well, the King James Version, the Douay Bible, the Douay-Rheims Bible, consume the Latin Vulgate and some of the, mostly the Latin Vulgate. And then the New King James Bible is a bit of a hybrid that uses the received text and some of the majority or the Byzantine text, and it marks where that is the case. And there's some lesser known versions, but your modern Bible versions that are commonly used today would be the American Standard Bible American Standard Version is used like by Church of Christ and by some Reformed Baptists. What's more popular, though, is the Revised Standard Version. It came out in 1942, the New Testament. And that is used by mainline Protestants as well as their Catholic versions, and Eastern Orthodox will use that version as well. And they come in different formats that have the deuterocanonical and apocryphal books. Same thing with the Anglicans, might use that version as well. Then there are the totally Protestant and evangelical versions, such as the New International Version, the New American Standard Version, the English Standard Version, and then there's a lot of more contemporary versions that have come out, kind of an explosion of it. But those are the main ones, really. I might have forgotten one, but those are the main versions that come out of the American Standard Version lineage. The King James comes out of the Tyndale lineage, and so does the New King James. The Douay comes from its own. It comes out of the Latin Vulgate. Although the Challoner edition of the Douay-Rheims is what most people have today. Bishop Challoner wanted to update the English language, and really what you'll see is what he did is borrow from the King James Bible for the terminology. And you can read an article by Jimmy Aiken if you want a secondary testimony to that. But you'll see that if you compare the King James Bible with the Douay-Rheims Bible, you see that they agree. They have a lot more in agreement than the King James with the Revised Standard or the Douay-Rheims with the Revised Standard, and so on. Okay, so enough for translations. So just to recap, in the modern landscape today, the coherence-based genealogical method is executed in Munster, Germany, by a handful of scholars that produce the ECM, which stands for the Editio Critica Major. The ECM is then consumed by the critical Greek New Testament providers, the UBS and the Nessa Elan. And by the way, those two texts are the same now. They've merged. So let's just call it the critical Greek New Testament. Then the critical Greek New Testament is consumed by the modern Bible versions. The modern Bible versions based on the critical Greek. Okay, back to our article and back to modern eclectic editions of the Bible. So we'll now take a look at each component of the United Bible Society's critical edition to provide a foundation for those who want to proceed to the Nessa Elan. So does this get bigger? Yes, it does. So here we see, here's the Greek text, and this is Ephesians 1. Paulos apostolos Christou Iesu dia thelematos theou tois agios tois ousin in Epheso kai pistois en Christo Iesus charis humin kai ereinen apotheou patros hemon kai Kyrio Jesus Christus. So it's Paul, apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of the God, to the saints who are, this ousin is like essence, who are in Ephesus, in brackets, and the faithful in Christ Jesus. And then here's the kind of the verb of of the greeting. Grace and peace from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ. So that's this is a salutation. You'll see that it's kind of like a Christmas present. You have to, you have from, to, and then the greeting. It's like there's no real verb in Merry Christmas, right? So you say, I wish you Merry Christmas. So wish is kind of an implied verb. Well, that's what he's saying here. Paul, to the saints in Ephesus, I wish you grace and peace. Okay, so that's the text. And then there's textual notes. And we see here that in chapter 1, verse 1, and the C here means that it's, actually it explains it more on the next page, so I won't get into it now. But these are the textual notes, and we'll dive into the details on the next page. Okay, so the textual apparatus. Okay, here we go. So I don't know if you can see this. The C here means it's rated to how certain they are. So they're not very certain that in Ephesus belongs is an authoritative rendering. So reading, you can see that A is most certain and D is least certain. So C is doubtful, right? But it tells you which manuscripts, which witnesses contain the phrase in Ephesus. And so we have Aleph, I believe, is Codex Sinaiticus. A is, I'm guessing. I shouldn't guess, but some of these manuscripts have in Ephesus. And here we see some witnesses, a lectionary, and then some versions of Syrian Vulgate, Armenian, Slavic, and then we have some church fathers witness to having in Ephesus. Okay, so at the beginning of each textual note are two numbers. The variants of each biblical chapter are noted by a small superscript number, so a small 1 there. The next number, which is larger, indicates the verse, so it's chapter 1, verse 1. It is possible to have one verse to have more than one variant, of course. The textual notes provide a great deal of information about the Greek text, generally in the following order. So the capital letter in brackets, this letter system is divided by the editors of the Greek text to give the reader some indication as to the relative certainty of the reading. The readings rate from A to D, so we already said that. Then description of the sources. So Category 1 are papyrus, Category 2 are uncials, Category 3 are, and so that's what these letters next to the letter are. So the 2 next to this Aleph means it's an unseal. The 2 next to this B means it's an unseal, and so on. 3 is cursives, 4 is Byzantine lectionaries, 5 are versions. Those are Bibles translated into other languages. We're talking about old languages. We're talking about like the Latin Vulgate translated into a Syriac, okay? I'm talking about ancient. And then 6 are church fathers or sources. Textual evidence for the reading. Usually a textual evidence for each reading is given in the order, and the abbreviations are called sigla. Table E2 is a brief description of some more common abbreviations in the UBS Greek New Testament textual apparatus. So there's some help with what the abbreviations mean. Common abbreviations. So we don't need to cover all this. You can, if you want to get into the Greek, there's instructions in the actual UBS Greek New Testament that you have. We don't need to go into this exhaustively. Other information about manuscripts abbreviated in the textual apparatus, including their dates, content, and where they currently are housed, appears on the list at the beginning of the United Bible Society's Greek text form. Because many manuscripts do not contain the entire New Testament, some letters are reissued. Okay, so there's this abbreviation system. When working in the Gospels, for example, make sure that the manuscript sigla contains the part of the text. The following symbols designate this information. E is Gospel, A is Acts, C is Catholic or General Epistles. Those are, the Catholic epistles doesn't mean Roman Catholic, it means General Epistles. They're written by the apostles Peter, John, and Jude, actually. So it's 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and Jude are the Catholic epistles. Then P are the epistles of Paul, and R is the book of Revelation. The works are usually listed in chronological order with their categories. Century dates of the manuscripts are noted in Roman numerals. The 2/ lines indicate the end of the textual information for the first reading. So that means the first variant. After which note for the second reading begins the same sequence. Oh no, I'm sorry, same variant, just a new reading. Okay. While the textual apparatus of the UBS Greek provides most of the information necessary to determine the most plausible original reading of the passage, the chart on page 228 may provide helpful when collating and evaluating the evidence for various readings. Okay, we're not going to get into this. So we have this worksheet. So this might be a worksheet that the board would go off of to determine the better reading. So let's pause. Okay, now we're moving to how textual critics determine the most plausible reading, the 20th century paradigm. But these are still relevant because much of these theories are used to inform the coherent space genealogical method in the 21st century. I guess we need to say now that the coherent space genealogical method has some objective criteria and some subjective. The objective criteria is that it uses computer algorithm graph theory to rip through all the data, and it can tell whether variant readings match, whether two copies match or not. Let's say two sections of a verse. So let's talk about the database of the coherent space genealogical method. It's broken out into portions where a variant exists. Okay, so there might be a variant, and there's no other variant within 10 words, and so then that's a 10-word chunk. So that's a text in the sense of a text to compare with other texts. And so anyway, if it's comparing 10 words in this particular text and 10 words in another text, and if they match, well, then the computer can figure that out quickly enough. It's a done deal. It matches. If they don't match, then you have to determine the lineage, the relationship. What you're doing is you're building a family tree. And so you need to decide whether this variant is a parent of the other variant, or a sister, or a cousin, and so to determine that is subjective, and the scholars will use a lot of the criteria that we're going to be discussing here in the 20th century paradigm to use as predicates to the algorithm. So the scholar's going to preload the computer program and tell it how to make decisions. I should also make a distinction between manuscripts and text. It's a bit of an overloaded term. The word text will be used in lots of different contexts. But when I'm speaking of the coherent space genealogical method, let's think of it this way. Let's say you go to the library, and on the wall is a print of the Declaration of Independence. Well, you find out that that's a 1983 print, but the text that it contains is from 1776. So it is a 1983 manuscript, physical evidence, that is a copy of a 1776 text, because you saw it was printed in 1983. Then you talk to the librarian, and they say, well, actually, that's not a direct copy from the Declaration of Independence that's in the Library of Congress, or wherever it is. It's a print from another print from 1970. So see, you're starting to build this lineage. It's a 1983 manuscript of a 1776 text, but it's a child of a 1970 manuscript, and that 1970 manuscript might be a child of another one. So you start building this family tree and start building up these relationships, and gives you an idea how they keep going back to, and so they're building these family trees within that context of one variant reading, which might be 10 words. And so after you've run all the algorithms, you're going to get to the root of the tree, and that's your Ausgangstext, your earliest reading. And so that's really all they try to do today, is find the earliest reading. They no longer speak in terms of finding the originals. So in general, determining the most plausible reading is you study the extant manuscripts and evaluate the variants. And then the percentage of variants in the New Testament is 7%. I think we said 6% earlier. And they like to say that no matter of doctrine is affected, except what about the doctrine of Scripture? But we'll leave it alone for now. Okay, finding the plausible reading. Where do we start? The first step is determine where possible errors appear in the text. So you find the variants. In the New Testament, textual criticism is fairly easy. The editors of the UBS text have done much of the work already for you by examining the various Greek manuscripts, ancient versions, and New Testament citations in the works of church fathers to see where variants appear. It would be almost impossible for the average student or even scholar to examine all the extant Greek manuscripts, ancient versions, and church fathers. At present, much of the work is done at the Institute for New Testament Research in Munster, Germany, where a reproduction of every Greek manuscript is housed, as well as much of the evidence from church fathers and ancient versions. I'll stop right there. So this Institute of New Testament Research in Munster, this is where the coherence-based genealogical method work is being done currently. So it's anyway, but this book does not seem to be aware of the coherence-based genealogical method. Anyway, continue. The most important evidence for the variants appears in the textual apparatus at the bottom of each page of the UBS Greek text. The text critic can use this information to evaluate the strength of the variant reading. Okay, collecting the evidence. There are two types of evidence. Internal evidence that comes from within the text itself. For example, the author's grammar or spelling habits, use of parallel passages, for example, and external evidence that comes from outside the text, for example, various manuscripts, versions, or quotes from church fathers. External evidence. External evidence comes primarily in three different sources that are summarized below. Each of these areas can supply valuable information to determine the most plausible original reading. New Testament Greek manuscripts. There are over 5,000 extant New Testament manuscripts, ranging from the small fragmentary manuscripts like P52 to almost complete copies of the New Testament, Codex Alexandrinus. David A. Black states, even for the book of Revelation, which is mostly poorly attested writing in New Testament, over 300 Greek manuscripts have been preserved. The earliest manuscripts written on papyrus date as early as the 2nd or 3rd century. Papyrus is made from a reed-like papyrus plant that grows along the banks of the Nile River in Egypt. Papyrus is perishable. It can easily be damaged by water or dry and brittle where exposed to sun, which is why so few papyrus manuscripts are extant today. And we talked about some of this. So anyway, we have this chart here. Does this get bigger? No. Sources of evidence for New Testament criticism. So we have this theoretical original text. So you have the manuscripts, the versions, and the patristic citations are all witnesses to what the original text might be. Okay? So we've talked about this. Versions. While initially the New Testament was written in Greek and with a few Aramaic words, but as the church spread, people of other regions wanted the Bible in their own languages. The earliest translations of the New Testament, dating to about AD 180, are in Latin, Syriac, and Coptic. In time, other regions were evangelized, and scriptures were then translated into Ethiopic, Armenian, Gothic, and Slavonic. The early versions most useful to the New Testament textual criticism are those that are translated directly from a Greek manuscript or were subsequently revised in light of Greek manuscripts. Okay? So the Syriac versions are used quite a bit. There are about 8,000 manuscripts of the Latin Vulgate alone. Okay? Not to mention all other versions. So the following list indicates relationships between various versions. Old Latin versions. This is mid-2nd century. A primary translation of the New Testament that reflects a Western text type family. Latin Vulgate by Jerome, 382 to 405. Apparently, Old Latin texts greatly influenced this version. Old Syriac versions, 2nd to 5th century. The Diatessaron from 170, primary translation for the Greek manuscripts, and the Syriac Pahita, I think this was the Pashita, primary translations from the Greek manuscripts. Coptic versions, 3rd to 5th century. Both Sahidic and Bohairic versions are primary translations from an Alexandrian text, but influence on Western texts is seen at certain points in the Gospel and text. Gothic versions, a primary literal translation of a Byzantine text. Armenian version, early 5th century, probably a secondary literal translation of Gothic or Syriac manuscripts. Georgian version, mid-5th century. tertiary translation, probably from Syriac or Armenian version. So it's been translated twice. It's from Greek to Syriac or Armenian, then from Armenian or Syriac to Georgian. Ethiopian version, 5th or 6th centuries. The sources of the majority of this translation are uncertain. The Catholic epistles and Revelation appear to be primary translations, but there is evidence of subsequent influences from Coptic and Arabic. Arabic versions, 8th century, influences from Greek, Old Syriac, Syriac, Peshitta, Coptic, and Latin versions. Old Slavonic version, 9th century, a primary translation from a Byzantine text family, however, a significant number of Western readings. So you can see all these versions, you can see that even they have sort of a family tree. They have influences from other versions and from certain text families of the Greek. Next category is patristic citations. Patristic citations must be used with caution since their accuracy is difficult to judge. A text may be a direct quote of a Greek manuscript, or the author may simply allude to a text or quote loosely from memory. Church fathers sometimes use several manuscripts, so citations of a particular passage may be from different sources. The patristic citations themselves are merely copies, often very late and not autographs. They too need to be subjected to the textual critical method in order to be given their appropriate weight. The patristic citations are extensive. It has been said that if for some reason the New Testament were destroyed, it could be completely retrieved entirely from the quotes of the early church fathers. That's great, actually. And so here are the prominent church fathers. There's Marcion from Rome, 130 to 170. Justin Martyr from Samaria, about 165. Tatian, 130 to 170 from Syria. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyons, about 202. Clement of Alexandria, 212. Tertullian of Carthage, after 220. Hippolytus, about 332, 35. Origen of Alexandria, 253. Eusebius, Bishop of Caesarea, 339. Hilary of Poitiers, 367. Lucifer of Cagliari, 370 from Italy. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, from 373. Ephraim the Syrian, 373. Gregory of Nazianzus, 389. Gregory of Nyssa, 394. And these are Cappadocians. From Cappadocia, these Gregories. They're related, actually. Ambrose of Milan, 397. Ambrosiaster, Pseudo-Ambrose from the 4th century. Epiphanius, Bishop of Salamis, 404. Rufinus, 410 from Syria. Jerome, from Rome, 419. Theodore of Mopsuestia is from Turkey, and he's 428. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, 430. Isidore of Pelusium from Egypt, 435. Cyril of Alexandria, Egypt, 444. And Pelagius, 4th to 5th century from Rome. So it'd be unrealistic, time-consuming to check all the patristic primary sources for every passage. Fortunately, modern eclectic Greek New Testaments have already done much of the work. In addition, the Institute for New Testament Research in Munster and the Ancient Biblical Manuscript Center in Claremont, California, are dedicated to having at least a facsimile copy of all the biblical manuscripts and fragments. We are the beneficiaries of great labor that scholars have invested in modern Greek New Testaments that include the most important information concerning variant readings of specific passages. Okay, so we're going to pick up next time with internal evidence. So we'll continue determining the most plausible reading, starting with internal evidence in the next episode. Thanks for your attention.